So I think what we've been hearing a lot and what we understand is that we're all habitual creatures, creatures of habit, whether the habits do something good for us or whether the habits are a bit more detrimental. And we have someone who can inspire us to really walk the path of using science, research, or just using our own intuition in a way that is more favorable. And in this next interview, let's put it that way, live podcast, we're going to talk about distilling science for everyday use. Some of you might have heard him on the main stage. It's Nicklas Brendborg. He's a Ph.D. student at Trygfonden's Center for Active Health at Rigshospitalet, and also recognized as one of the most promising talents in biomedicine of the Novo Nordisk's International Talent Program. And he's going to be interviewed by Matt. So please give it up. Gentlemen, would like to have you on stage. Mats and Nicklas.
Hi, Nicklas, and welcome to a little bit of a different talk. You've just been on the keynote stage. So, Nicklas, of course, you're the author of Jellyfish Aging Backwards and have now also come out with a book called Vanedyr, which I think roughly translates to creatures of habit, which we can also talk a little bit about. But you're a young man. What actually motivated you to look into this whole process of aging and longevity?
Yes, so in general, what I think about is actually interesting if you look at both these topics, is that even if you go around here, like health from like the first perspective becomes just increasingly more complex. There's like a billion different things that you have to focus on. So I like to see if you can like peel all of the complexity back and see, is there some underlying thing that actually causes all of this other stuff? So if you talk about jellyfish age backwards, we have all these different diseases. So for instance, when I did my bachelor's and my master's, they will teach you about billion types of cancer, and you can get cardiovascular diseases, and you can get all these different kinds of dementia. But if you take a step back, the root cause is actually just aging. So aging causes all of these different things, and of course there's also other factors at play. But it just shows you where should I focus my effort. It will be more beneficial to focus on the point that actually causes all of these things than take each of them individually. The same with the creatures of habit is basically we have a lot of other health crises that are not aging related, like obesity, mental health problems, especially among young people, loneliness, lots of different addictions today. And again, they don't really seem to have that much in common, but then if you dive into it, it actually shows that there's this common theme again that runs through all of these different areas, and then you can focus on that thing and understanding that thing instead of understanding each little detail about everything.
Okay, so just looking into that thing, so is there a common denominator when you talk about all these lonelinesses in your book?
So the common denominator is what's called a superstimuli. And basically what it means is that at this point we understand the human brain pretty well. We also, of course, understand animal brains. Then our brain is developed to make us do certain things. So we seek out food, we seek out sex, we seek out social bonds, we seek out like adventures, generally having exciting experiences. But all of these things mean that then if you have a product you want to sell, you can try to appeal to this instinct. And if you then make kind of a supernaturally strong appeal to these instincts, then it's what we call a superstimuli. So the easiest way to understand it is in my book I talk about this little bird. It lays these tiny eggs that have a faint blue greenish color. Then if you make a huge egg and then paint it really, really brightly blue, put it in next to the bird, then it will say, okay, I don't want to be on my own egg anymore because this is more exciting. So it tries to jump on this big, brightly colored egg instead. So it's basically, you find out what is this bird attracted to, and then you just exaggerate it. And you can think about it in our food, for instance. We've been eating fruit for millions and millions of years, practically our whole evolutionary history since the dinosaurs. So humans, we have this ingrained wanting for something that tastes sweet. But now we can isolate sugar, and then we can just add a ton of it. So you can make a super stimuli for sweetness. That basically when you do that to your product, people want to eat it a lot, so you sell a lot of product, and then you earn a lot of money. But we tend to then overeat, eat too many calories, and then we gain weight.
Yeah. But are we actually doomed to fail as a society with these like big tech, big consumer products, big whatever? Are they, or what can we do as individuals? Because it's funny because we talked before we went on stage about a lot of like jellyfish aging backwards is what you can do as a person to reverse aging. And now you have a society which is almost fighting against your ability to do so.
Yeah. There is stuff you can do. It will require willpower because the very like instinctual initial reaction you have to say sugar or social media, which would be another thing, it's a super stimuli for social instincts. You cannot control your initial reaction, so it's completely automatic. You cannot teach yourself to not say like sweetness or saltiness in the food. You can be lucky to be born with slightly different taste preferences, but that initial reaction is hardwired. So then you need to kind of work around this stuff. You have to change your habits in a way that makes it so that you can control that initial reaction. So maybe you don't even have it. You don't have candy laying around because even if you are obsessed with health, like if you just have all these constant cues about these different super stimuli, then your brain, is built to try to seek out high calorie foods, social opportunities, and so on. So it will see this as a huge opportunity, and having to fight that is a losing battle in the end. But of course, there is stuff you can do. And then also just awareness. Like we could see one of the best, or one of the fights we've won against something that could be called a super stimuli is against nicotine and tobacco. And basically the best thing we did was just to cut, or just to tell people about what was happening, how are you being manipulated, what's the health consequences, and then at least a part of the population will be able to then, using a little willpower, make up some stuff you can do to keep away from it.
But don't you think people today, in at least Western society, are educated well enough to know that they're being manipulated?
I think a lot of people will be surprised.
Of how much or at all?
How much and how easy it is and how primitive. Like a lot of when you optimize food for human consumption, you can do a lot of the studies by just using mice and rats. Because even though, of course, our brain is more developed, this part of the brain is practically the same. It's based on the same, like really, really primitive part of the brain. So it's not the hardest thing to hack. I think a lot of people will also be surprised just how broad this is. So at this point, we know, like social media companies, for instance, how they manipulate you. But to then extend it to everything from like people that make movies or TV series, computer games, the porn industry, people that make dating apps, and people that make all kinds of food and alcohol and all these, like you would call them maybe lust-based industries. It's just all the same business model at the end, just with different products.
But what happens to us neurologically or biologically from like an input perspective? Because you describe it as I can get this amount of sugar, or I can superload it to a super stimuli, and now so there must also be a super high and a super low when you start using this. So you actually start craving it more, or?
I mean, you could say that what you come with, like in the factory setting when you're born, you have receptors on your taste receptors on your tongue that can sense sweetness, that are connected to the reward system of your brain.
Yeah.
And then at least to a certain amount, it's just about how many taste receptors are activated at once. So basically the concentration, and then it just goes up. And you can have different wiring that will make you more and less susceptible, but it is basically this concentration-based step. And for a lot of these things, we have not developed a ceiling for this stuff. For instance, if you think about this bird, the bird comes with natural limitations on how big the egg can be and how brightly colored, because it takes energy to produce the pigment that makes it colored, and it has there's physical limitations to the size. So normally size and color indicate how healthy the egg is, but there's no need to have a top for the instinct. It's just you can't go above a certain point. And the same for us. If you are a hunter-gatherer and you could find just once something like a Kit Kat bar, it would be an amazing opportunity because it's so many calories, right? So there's no need to put a lid on it. It's just that then once this gets triggered, every single day of your life, then you overeat and gain weight.
Yeah. So what are the physical and mental challenges you suspect we see more and more that we are living in like a super stimulated environment? I mean, right now we see there was a report a year ago about how many people who were depressed, who had anxiety. There's a new generation of overstimulated people. How is the effect on our mental physical health being an environment in this? And what are the things that we are not aware of that you have studied?
Well, we can see that there's this report that's done every 4th year on Danish youth. You ask them basically, what are you doing in your daily life? How do you feel about your school, your parents, like just everything. You just try to get like, how is the youth doing? And you can just see one of the graphs that's very striking is that there's a decrease in the amount of people that say they've spent time with a friend any time like outside of school in the last week. Both sexes and all ages just goes downward. Then if you ask about how many times have you been to a concert, it goes down. Like sporting event, down. Parties, everything just goes down. And it's just like, what is everyone doing? But of course, everyone is on their phone. And that time has to actually be taken from somewhere. So you can also see even couples today have less sex than they used to. And that's also not necessarily because some people would argue that it's hormonally based, but it's most likely just, you have a strong competitor about what you could do otherwise. Also, like, instead of being with your friends, you can be social just on your phone. So we also see that there's actually quite the decrease in violence among young people, because when you're not outside meeting other people physically,
it's just trolling and online bullying.
Exactly. But you're not going to get in a fight, and you're not going to get arrested for like punching someone because you're just sitting at home. But of course, that does also have some mental consequences. So we can see there's this increase in depression and anxiety. Yeah. There's been a huge discussion among psychologists and sociologists about why that is. But I think one of the most obvious things that have changed is that people spend a lot of time online. And there's an interesting thing there where if you want to induce depression in a mouse to study it, one of the things you can do is you can make what's called constant social defeat, where you basically just take a mouse strain that's very small and then put one of these mice into a cage with a lot of mice that are really, really big. And like mice, they seem like they're cute animals, but they're actually really, really mean to each other. So when they meet each other, they kind of square off to see like who's gonna be the dominant one here. And when you're really, really small, you're always gonna lose that, because that hierarchy is basically only based on like, can one mouse kill the other mouse? So then this mouse is just, it loses and loses and loses, and then it induces these kind of symptoms. Then if you think about what happens when you sit on your phone, for instance, scrolling Instagram. So the algorithm wants you to be there as long as possible. And it doesn't get you to be there by showing you random stuff. It shows you what is most appealing to you. So we know attractive people are appealing. So that would be the very, very most attractive people to use the app. Successful people, we like to follow successful people. We like to follow people that are like funny and stuff. But basically it's just like the top 0.01%. So then in your like really, really primitive primate brain, each time you encounter a person on this app, you might start thinking, okay, this is a person that's more successful than me, they're better looking, and you get this warped social image where everyone in the world are actually just doing so much better than you. Whereas if you're living in the real world, you're going to have something that you tend to notice, okay, I'm better at this or that than people, and then you build your self...
Perception is different, right?
Yes, then you build your self-esteem from that.
Yeah. So if we want to go back to a little bit more of a positive note on what you can do, so back to jellyfish aging backwards, what are some of the key takeaways of beneficial things that were surprising to you on your journey?
Well, what I think was surprising, or what has gotten the most interest, is that I have a tiny sentence in there where I just say, use dental floss, and that just every single journalist just thought that was the...
Yeah, it's a note on my paper as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's the most interesting thing ever. Actually, since then, for 3 years, I have not bought like toothpaste, toothbrushes, because all these companies keep just sending me boxes of all this different stuff. And it's not like you're gonna get as much from that as like exercising or diet, of course, but it's basically that we can see there's a lot of microbes living in your mouth, like bacteria and so on. Some of these tend to show up the weirdest places, like inside the brains of people who got dementia, inside tumors for people that have different kinds of cancers further down the GI tract. And then they also tend to just generally having a lot of bacteria in your mouth seems to increase your risk of these diseases.
Okay.
But these bacteria, they live off the food that's left in your mouth. So it's not as much flossing as it's just keeping a healthy mouth. Because a lot of the bacteria there, they have kind of the best spot because the flow kind of starts here. So they have the ability to then migrate all the way down through the system. Whereas if you're further down, it can be hard to go the other way. So it's very important to keep the mouth clean.
Yeah. I already have 2 recommendations just on the talk. More sex and flossing your teeth and seeing your friends. It's a good place to
that would be all good answers. I actually talk about loneliness in Jellyfish Age Backwards as well. That we can see it's one of the biggest risk factors for an early death.
And why is that? What is it happens with loneliness? Is there like a physiological, biological consequence of decay or mental decay, or what are we seeing?
You could at least speculate on what it is. And I would say something that's very obvious is that we are a very social species. Like, we're built to be social, and if you are a hunter-gatherer that is alone, you're having a seriously bad time because you are gonna be really like in a bad place if you meet predators. You're gonna be in a bad place if you meet other humans, because back then we weren't so nice when we met strangers. You might have a hard time even finding food for yourself. So we're just hardwired to wanting to be social. So it's like a constant low-level stressor that you don't fulfill this need you have. So that could be one of the reasons. But then also probably that your habits will tend to.
So there's like a consequence of loneliness is the emotional is I might also eat differently. I might even exercise less. Like
yes, and then also we have brains that are hardwired to seek out pleasure in some form.
Yeah.
If you live a really rich life, you have lots of ways you can seek out pleasure. If you don't have sociality as one of them, then you really narrow it down, and that's also why we see people that tend to not have the best upbringing or circumstances. They have an easier time getting, say, addicted to drugs, because if your brain is looking at this palette and you can see, I can get happy by eating good food, but also by my friends, or because I can do my exercise or my interest and my hobbies, then you have all these things you can choose. If everything in your life is just really, really bad, then your brain knows, okay, I have drugs, I have alcohol, I have unhealthy food, and that's the options I have for feeling getting a good feeling.
Yeah.
So it's much more narrow.
Yeah, but I guess also the consequences is the low is even lower. You get a spike in your heart, is super stimulant, and back to the whole low part.
That is, and then I talk a lot about something called desensitization in the book, which is basically that our brains are also developed to never be satisfied, because you should always seek out more food, better experiences, more social connections, a better mate, whatever. The brain is kind of built that way in what's called the hedonic treadmill. So when you satisfy something, say you have a really, really good experience, maybe you earn a lot of money for the first time, then maybe the next time you earn a similar amount of money, it's also good, but slowly your brain adjusts to it, and then now you have to do even more to get the same kind of feeling. And if you only get what you used to be really happy about, then it's not so good anymore.
No.
So we also do that on a less abstract level. Just for instance, if you eat a lot of sugary foods, you get less sensitive to sweet taste. So you need more sugar to taste that something is sweet. That also means if you cut out sugar, if you cut out salt also, then you regain this sensitivity. So in that way, then as you escalate, you don't get a richer or more happy life. You just need more and more and more of the stimuli to actually feel anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are ways to reset it from at least a food perspective.
Yes, for most stuff, but it's tied to how you can say fried you made your whole system. So we know people who go off like really strong drugs, like people say you've been a heroin addict or something. You can get a long period of what's called anhedonia, where you have a hard time feeling pleasure from anything, because I'm not saying it's the most pleasurable experience, like meaning-wise and so on, but like if we're talking purely about just activating this one circuit in the brain, it's like really just pushing down the button and just keeping it there.
Yeah.
So then it will take time before you get sensitive to the simple joy of, say, a good meal or being social. And that's also why you have a tendency to narrow down the stuff that that gives you pleasure with this stuff. So then, like if your ceiling is all the way up here, that's a lot of stuff that other people might find enjoyable that you just don't get any enjoyment from.
No, because I've tried heroin.
You have?
No.
Okay.
Not that I have, but it's hard to get there if heroin has been your high.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or even worse, now people are doing fentanyl, which is 50 times harder than.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say then you did a good job.
Yeah. If I'm still here, yeah, because
Yeah.
it's quite addictive. Yeah. So one of the other things now that a lot of things is about habits. One thing is about the habits against all these super stimuli and getting better habits. But through your journey of investigating stuff for jellyfish aging bacteria and writing the books, what are like key things you changed in your own life through your
Yeah, I would basically say that I've changed stuff as I went. So all of these books have started with my own maybe thoughts about what should I do and what should I advise like my parents, my siblings, my best friends to do. Because also when you're in this field, just studying this stuff, you get a lot of questions about, oh, is this a good thing to do? Or should I do, like, is this true or false and so on. So I have kind of adjusted myself as I've gone along, and then the books have also maybe changed stuff, but once I make it to writing the book, I have usually researched the stuff a lot beforehand, like for years. Yeah. So at that point, I kind of know what I'm going to write.
Yeah. Okay. So for the people sitting and listening in the audience right now, what are kind of like, okay, here's some, based on the whole anti-aging thing, of key habits you would introduce easily?
Easily is another question. There tends to be an inverse correlation between how easy something is and how effectful. So, for instance, among easy things, I talk about stuff like using dental floss and being a blood donor. But that also tends to be the stuff that might have the smallest effect. Whereas we can see in my PhD, I've been fortunate to both do work with people that maybe start exercising and also see a lot of other people's studies, and it's just crazy how much you can change in a person by making them actually be physically active. Yeah. But it's also really, really hard, especially when we see when people are then that go from the program, and if you follow up afterwards, there's just a huge drop-off because it's so hard to keep the habit alive. Especially if you're someone maybe that have challenges in other areas. So basically the big 3 pillars is exercise, diet and sleep. It's more fun sometimes to talk about the supplements and stuff, but a lot of people use the supplements as a band-aid. Like they're feeling a little guilty that they work so hard that they hardly sleep. Maybe half the workout sessions don't really materialize because you didn't have time, and some of the dinners maybe be at McDonald's and so on. But then I heard about the supplement that I can take, and that's just not, it doesn't work.
No. So the baseline needs to, and the supplement is an add-on to what you're already doing correctly.
Yes, and it's of course also, it's way, way harder to take a person that is just really, really fit and healthy and then benefit them than it is to take someone who has like an obvious thing is if someone is a smoker, that should basically just be your sole purpose. It doesn't even matter if you start eating more junk food because you stop smoking, because you should just get rid of the smoking first, and then you can deal with all the other problems later. Yeah.
So maybe also one of the things is moderate into your health. One of the things I read in your book, which I love referring to, is you talk about stress, and stress is one of the things that we talk a lot about in life, and there's both negative stress and positive stress. But there's this story about, I think it's a biodome with a tree in it that dies because it's not being forced with wind and rain and etc. So it's actually withering because it's not being...
Yeah, trees will produce something called stress wood when they're impacted by the wind. So if you don't impact them by the wind, a lot of plants will be really, really weak. Some of these trees ended up falling, and the others, when they inspected them later, were just like way weaker than a tree would be outside. So there's even people that grow various plants inside that are aware of this and will try to stimulate them that way, or at least make them grow on some kind of beam so that they have support. Yeah. And it's a very general rule in biology that a lot of organisms need a little bit of input that is stress to be the healthiest they can be, because bodies are also built to save energy. So if for instance your muscles are never stressed, your body is basically like, okay, I could save a little energy by just not having as much muscle mass or as much bone mass and so on. But then when you start aging, you start from a really low level, and then once you also start to lose something with age, then you're in a bad place.
Yeah. So what are kind of some of the misinterpretations of stress you've seen through your things? Because it was a buzzword many years ago, and it's still something that we talk a lot about in the workspace, in the home space, etc. What should people listening in understand more about stress from a positive, negative perspective? I think you have a chapter that says what doesn't kill you
makes you stronger.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, there's of course some types of stress that are always bad. So I talked a little bit about that in my talk before, where you can see a stress factor such as exercise is hugely beneficial, but that's also because tissues such as the muscles and the bones, the heart and the lungs, they're really adaptable. So they handle getting damaged quite well, and there's some mechanism that can easily build new tissue. Whereas your brain is really, really bad at it. So if you do something that hurts your brain, you will most likely not be able to recover the full function of it. So there's differences there, but another rule of thumb is generally we are very good at handling acute stressors. So you have something that's really stressful for a short amount of time. We're not very good at handling chronic low-level stressors. So something that maybe not is as bad as the acute one, but it just keeps on going.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the stuff that happens mentally. People that get a clinical stress disorder is usually you just go and go with this level of stress, and you can never escape it. Whereas having like single experiences where you have to perform something and it's a little stressful can be hugely beneficial for your mental health. Like we can see people that never challenge themselves can tend to become a little like nihilistic, maybe even a little depressed, because we are built as a species to have problems and try to solve them.
Okay. So what are some of the things, now it's been a few years since jellyfish age backwards came out. What are some of the things that you would wished you would have investigated as well on that tour, or are we looking into a 2.0 of jellyfish looking backwards now with your PhD?
That's a good question, and there's definitely gonna, of course, become like there's gonna be an updated version at some point because this is a revolving field. But I say the update right now is that for the Danish speakers, I have a podcast on Danmarks Radio called Jagten på det evige liv, where we dive into some of these topics. So that's a kind of a way to take a little subtopic, and then we can talk for anything, I think, between 30 minutes and 1.5 hours about that thing. Yeah. One of the things is that in the book I talk about fasting, which hugely beneficial in mice. You can make them live a lot longer. You can get kind of molecularly the same response in humans, but the problem is that when you're a human, your metabolism is just a lot slower than a mouse. So the heart of a mouse just beats extremely fast, and it needs to eat a lot of food for its size compared to what we do, because it loses a lot of heat because it's so small. So that means if you are a mouse and you fast for 1 day, that's not the same as a human fasting for 1 day. A human might need to go 3 days, meaning that when we get beneficial results from fasting a mouse for 1 day, if a human will need the equivalent, then you should go for longer. And that just makes it a lot harder to actually implement as a busy person that also has other stuff to do.
To fast for 3 days?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Before the response even begins.
Okay.
So it's a lot more complicated, and there's people now trying to see, can we work around this somehow? Can we speed up the process? Maybe if you do heavy exercise beforehand, you can cut off a day. Maybe if you have a few, maybe if you calorie restrict yourself a little bit in the week prior, you can cut off a little more time. So there's people trying to work around it, but for now it just seems to be a lot more bothersome than I had hoped for in the beginning at least.
Okay. So Nicklas Brendborg sitting here today, is he hoping to achieve eternal life?
That's also a question I get a lot. I would say that would be also risking jinxing it to I want to live forever. I would say you can never as an individual know what is going to happen. There's still, even if you look at the death statistics for Statistic Denmark, accidents is quite high up there, and that's not even counting the fact that something like getting cancer is something you can decrease the risk of, but that you cannot prevent fully. Like every single animal species get cancer, so you can be unlucky, and you'll never know. But of course, I hope to make. I mean,
you'll do the steps to at least.
Yeah, I will do everything I can do to increase my chances. And the thing is, if a lot of people just do 80% of that, then of course for the vast majority of them it's going to pay off. And then there's going to be a few unlucky ones that don't get the payoff. But I would say it also improves the quality of your life anyway, so it's worth doing.
Okay. I want to thank you for your time here today and sharing some of your insight and some of your own story about your 2 books. If you want to talk to, or we can bring up our moderator now to say thank you for the talk. But it's been a pleasure having you both on the keynote stand and sitting here telling a little bit about your story. So thank you for sitting in.
Thank you.